They said Hollywood was full of secrets, but no one imagined this one would stay buried for so long. From smiles on camera to whispers behind the scenes, what really happened between Buddy Ebsen and his co-star was far darker than anyone dared to say out loud. She utterly hated him, and now we finally know the reason why. Was it jealousy? Betrayal? Or something even more shocking that the studios tried to cover up for decades? Stay right here, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see one of Hollywood's most beloved figures forever. But before we dive deep into this storm of secrets, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Not just because it helps the channel grow, but because when you subscribe, you're telling YouTube that you want more truth, more mystery, and more stories that others are too afraid to tell. Your support keeps these hidden stories alive and brings more untold Hollywood truths to light. So go ahead, subscribe, like, and be part of the few who really know what went on behind those glittering studio lights. Now, let's rewind time to the golden age of television, when smiles were rehearsed and friendships were anything but real. On screen, Buddy Ebsen seemed like everyone's favorite uncle, charming and kind, but off camera, things took a chilling turn. Reports of tension, manipulation, and even betrayal started to emerge, and one particular co-star, who once adored him, ended up despising his very presence. What could push someone to hate a man who the world adored? Was it something personal, or was it the toxic Hollywood system that destroyed relationships from within? You'll soon see that the answer is far more twisted than anyone could imagine. And here's the deal. The last revelation in this video will leave you speechless. So watch until the end, because the final piece of this story will completely change how you remember Buddy Ebsen. While we uncover shocking letters, unheard testimonies, and behind-the-scenes confessions that were once buried deep, I want you to comment below. What part of this story surprises you the most? Was it the secret feud, the betrayal, or the way Hollywood covered it all up? Let me know your thoughts. I read every single comment, and your reaction shape what stories we uncover next. So buckle up, because this isn't just another Hollywood rumor. This is a truth that was never meant to be told. Let's begin the tragic rift. Buddy Ebsen and Nancy Culp, the truth behind the Hollywood feud. In the shimmering glow of Hollywood's golden era, few television duos appeared more charming and endearing than Buddy Ebsen and Nancy Culp of the Beverly Hillbillies. On screen, they were the epitome of warmth, humor, and family. But behind the camera, a darker story was unfolding, one filled with betrayal, resentment, and heartbreak that would follow them until their final days. Buddy Ebsen, born Christian Rudolph Ebsen Jr. in 1908 in Illinois, started his career as a dancer. Tall, athletic, and graceful, he was once set to become a major musical star. In fact, Ebsen was originally cast as the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, 1939, a dream role that turned into a nightmare. The aluminum dust used in the makeup poisoned his lungs, nearly killing him. He was replaced by Jack Haley, but Ebsen's Hollywood innocence died right there. That near-death experience changed him. Those who knew him said he became more withdrawn, more distrustful, and deeply bitter toward the film industry that almost cost him his life. After years of smaller roles, Buddy Ebsen's big break came with the Beverly Hillbillies in 1962. As Jed Clampett, the kind-hearted hillbilly who strikes oil and moves to Beverly Hills, he became one of America's most beloved TV fathers. But off-screen, he was a complex man, disciplined, opinionated, and known for being difficult to challenge. Crew members often described him as a perfectionist who demanded control over how scenes were done. Still, he had an undeniable charisma that made him the center of attention wherever he went. Then came Nancy Culp. Born in 1921 in Pennsylvania, she was intelligent, witty, and fiercely independent. Before acting, she served in the U.S. Navy during World War II, an experience that shaped her confidence and resilience. After the war, she entered Hollywood, known for her quirky charm and unmistakable voice. When she was cast as Miss Jane Hathaway, the loyal and slightly awkward secretary, she instantly became a fan favorite. Off-screen, Nancy was just as sharp, She held a master's degree in English and wasn't afraid to voice her opinions, even when they clashed with her co-stars. The chemistry between Culp and Ebsen on camera was undeniable. But away from the studio lights, their relationship began to crumble. Colleagues described the atmosphere as tense. Ebsen's conservative worldview often clashed with Culp's progressive ideals. What started as subtle disagreements turned into quiet hostility. Still, professionalism kept the peace until the 1980s when everything changed. In 1984, Nancy Culp made a bold move. She ran for Congress in Pennsylvania, representing the Democratic Party. Her campaign focused on education, equality, and women's rights, values she deeply believed in. But what she didn't expect was that her former co-star, Buddy Ebsen, would publicly turn against her. He appeared in political ads endorsing her opponent, labeling her ideas as too liberal. The betrayal was devastating. Culp, who once called Ebsen a friend, told reporters afterward, "That hurt me deeply. I never thought he'd do something like that." From that moment, their friendship was beyond repair. Nancy said in later interviews that she would never speak to Buddy again. Ebsen, for his part, rarely commented, but insiders said he believed he was defending his principles. Fans, however, saw it as an act of cruelty. Behind the scenes, both stars carried private pain. Buddy Ebsen had endured several failed marriages, and though he had children, his personal life was turbulent. He later confessed in interviews that he struggled with loneliness and regret. Nancy Culp, meanwhile, faced whispers about her personal life, particularly regarding her sexuality, a taboo subject in that era. Though she never spoke openly about it, friends suggested she lived quietly and authentically, refusing to conform to Hollywood's expectations. As time passed, the feud faded from the headlines, but never from their hearts. In the late 1980s, Culp was diagnosed with cancer. Despite her illness, she continued to work, appearing in small roles and giving interviews filled with wit and strength. She died in 1991 at age 69, reportedly never reconciling with Buddy Ebsen. When asked about her years later, Ebsen simply said, "We had our differences, but I respected her talent." Buddy Ebsen lived a long life, passing away in 2003 at the age of 95. In his later years, he turned to writing, painting, and reflecting on his complicated Hollywood legacy. Though fans remember him as the gentle Jed Clampett, those who knew him understood that behind his calm smile was a man marked by survival, stubborn pride, and unhealed wounds. Their story remains one of the most tragic and fascinating rivalries in classic television history. A reminder that behind every perfect Hollywood partnership lies a human story of ego, pain, and pride. Two stars who once made America laugh ended up divided forever by ideals, betrayal, and silence. She utterly hated Buddy Ebsen. Now we know the reason why. 1. Behind the Hollywood smile. In the glittering world of classic Hollywood, everything seemed perfect. Bright smiles, friendly faces, and the illusion that everyone in front of the camera got along like one big happy family. But as we peel back the layers of that golden image, we discover that sometimes what happens behind the studio lights is far more complicated. The story of Buddy Ebsen and Nancy Culp begins exactly like that, with charm, laughter, and admiration, only to slowly twist into a tale of tension and hidden resentment. When the Beverly Hillbillies premiered in 1962, it was an instant success, and audiences adored the chemistry between Ebsen, the wise and lovable Jed Clampett, and Culp, the elegant and loyal Miss Jane Hathaway. They appear to be the perfect pair. He brought the warmth, and she brought the wit. But while their on-screen connection made millions laugh, behind the cameras, a quiet storm was forming. Buddy Ebsen was an old-school performer, shaped by the tough realities of early Hollywood. He had survived the heartbreak of being replaced in The Wizard of Oz after nearly dying from toxic makeup, and he carried that experience with him for the rest of his life. It made him cautious, serious, and deeply protective of his career. He valued discipline and respect, and he expected everyone around him to share his mindset. Nancy Culp, on the other hand, was the exact opposite in many ways. Educated, independent, and ahead of her time, she brought an intellectual spark that sometimes clashed with Ebsen's more traditional personality. Culp wasn't afraid to speak her mind or question authority, which didn't always sit well with Buddy, who preferred order and hierarchy on set. What started as small disagreements over timing or script direction slowly turned into unspoken frustration. Yet, to the public, everything still looked perfect. They smiled for press photos, laughed during interviews, and played their roles with total professionalism. But crew members noticed the small details. The way conversations between the two became shorter, the rare eye contact during breaks, and the faint tension that hung in the air between scenes. Ebsen was polite but distant, while Culp often avoided confrontation, channeling her energy into her character instead. It was the kind of quiet conflict that no one dared to discuss publicly at the time. Despite the growing strain, both remained committed to their work. They understood the magic of what they were creating and never allowed personal differences to interfere with the show's success. Still, Hollywood is a place where image often matters more than truth, and the perfect friendship the world adored was, in reality, a fragile illusion. Behind the Hollywood smile, there was pride, misunderstanding, and two very different personalities forced to share the same spotlight. And though the tension stayed mostly invisible to fans, it was the beginning of a rift that would eventually become one of television's most unforgettable behind-the-scenes feuds. 2. The clash of ideals. As time went on, what truly set Buddy Ebsen and Nancy Culp apart wasn't just their personalities, it was their beliefs, their values, and the way they viewed the world. The clash of ideals between them was like a quiet earthquake on the set of the Beverly Hillbillies, subtle at first, but powerful enough to shake the foundation of their friendship. Buddy Ebsen, raised in a conservative, traditional household, believed deeply in order, discipline, and respect for authority. He came from a time when men were expected to lead, rules were meant to be followed, and emotions were best kept private. Having grown up through the Great Depression and survived the hardships of early Hollywood, Buddy valued stability above all else. He was polite and gentlemanly, but could be firm, even stubborn, when someone challenged his way of doing things. To him, professionalism and structure were sacred. Nancy Culp, on the other hand, was a product of a different mindset. Educated, open-minded, and unafraid of change, she represented a newer generation of thinkers who believed in progress and equality. She had served in the Navy during World War II, earning a reputation for intelligence and independence at a time when women were still expected to stay in traditional roles. Her experiences made her confident and self-assured, and she wasn't the type to stay quiet when she disagreed. On set, she often used humor and wit to express her opinions, which some saw as refreshing, but Buddy sometimes saw it as disrespectful. Their conversations about simple topics like acting styles or episode themes occasionally drifted into deeper debates about life, values, and society. Ebsen's conservative views clashed with Culp's progressive ideas about gender, politics, and personal freedom. While he valued loyalty and conformity, she valued authenticity and self-expression. It wasn't that they disliked each other at first. It was that they lived by different rules. Over time, those differences became impossible to ignore. Crew members remembered moments when Buddy would make traditional or politically charged remarks and Nancy would answer with sharp, clever comebacks that left the room silent. To her, it was harmless honesty. To him, it was a lack of respect. Slowly, mutual admiration turned into quiet irritation. Yet, both were professionals. They never let these differences affect their performances, and on camera, their chemistry remained magical. But behind the scenes, the distance grew. They stopped spending time together off-set. What had once been casual, friendly conversations became short exchanges about work and little else. Some of their colleagues later described the atmosphere as cold politeness, a kind of invisible wall that no one dared to cross. It wasn't one explosive argument that broke their connection. It was years of tiny, unspoken disagreements that built up like dust settling over something beautiful. And though neither of them would admit it then, This clash of ideals planted the seed for what would become one of the most public and painful feuds in classic television history. For two people who once shared laughter, talent, and respect, it was ideology, not fame or money, that turned friendship into silent rivalry. 3. The ultimate betrayal. By the time the 1980s arrived, the bond between Buddy Ebsen and Nancy Kulp had already grown thin, stretched by years of quiet tension and unspoken disagreement. Yet, despite their differences, few could have imagined that things would ever turn as bitter as they did. The ultimate betrayal came not from a heated argument on set or a clash over fame, but from something far more personal: politics, loyalty, and pride. After the Beverly Hillbillies ended, both actors went their separate ways. Buddy continued acting for a while, later moving into writing and painting, enjoying a quieter life with his family. Nancy Kulp, however, decided to take a bold new path. Always intellectually curious and deeply passionate about public service, she entered politics. In 1984, she announced her candidacy for Congress in her home state of Pennsylvania as a Democrat. Her campaign was sincere, rooted in her lifelong belief in education, equality, and progress. She was admired for her honesty and humility. She wasn't a celebrity seeking attention. She truly wanted to make a difference. The public found her intelligent and grounded, and her fans from the Beverly Hillbillies were excited to see her in a new light. But what Nancy didn't expect was that her biggest opposition wouldn't come from the political arena. It would come from her own former co-star, Buddy Ebsen. A lifelong conservative and loyal Republican, Buddy was approached by Kulp's opponent's campaign team. They asked if he would record an endorsement ad, warning voters about Nancy's liberal positions. To the shock of many, Buddy agreed. Soon, television commercials began airing featuring Ebsen's familiar face and friendly voice, saying that Nancy Kulp's political ideas were too liberal for Pennsylvania. For millions of viewers, it was just another campaign message. But for Nancy, it was a deep and personal betrayal. She was stunned. The man she had once worked beside for nearly a decade, the man whose friendship she had respected, despite their differences, had publicly humiliated her in front of the entire country. During interviews, she struggled to hide her pain. "Buddy hurt me deeply," she admitted in one. "I never thought he'd do something like that." Those who knew her said she felt not only betrayed, but disrespected. She had never attacked him, never mocked his beliefs, and had always spoken fondly of their time together. To see him campaign against her felt like a knife to the heart. When reporters asked Buddy about it later, he seemed unbothered. "I just told the truth," he said, insisting it wasn't personal. But to Nancy, it was impossible to see it any other way. She lost the election by a significant margin, and although no one could say whether Buddy's endorsement made the difference, it certainly hurt her emotionally. Afterward, she told friends that she would never speak to him again, and she kept her word. The two never reconciled, not even when they later appeared in the same documentaries or retrospectives about the show. Fans who had grown up watching them together were heartbroken to learn of their falling out. But for Nancy, the wound never healed. That political ad wasn't just a difference in opinion. It was a symbol of everything that had driven them apart: ideology, pride, and the inability to understand each other beyond their own beliefs. What had begun as a friendship based on shared success ended in public division. And while Buddy may have seen it as simply standing by his convictions, Nancy saw it as the ultimate betrayal, one that would follow both of them for the rest of their lives. Forget the private pain they both carried. Behind the laughter, the fame, and the polished image that television created, both Buddy Ebsen and Nancy Kulp carried private pains that most of the world never saw. They were stars who made millions smile every week, but when the cameras stopped rolling, each was left to wrestle with their own struggles. Emotional scars that shaped not only their personalities, but also the way they treated the people around them. For Buddy Ebsen, pain came early in his career and never truly left. Long before the Beverly Hillbillies made him famous, he had been chosen to play the Tin Man in the 1939 classic The Wizard of Oz. It was supposed to be his big break, a role that would make him a household name. But tragedy struck when a metallic makeup used on set poisoned his lungs, sending him to the hospital in critical condition. He was replaced without warning, and the studio quickly moved on as if he had never been there. That experience changed him forever. From that day on, he became more guarded, more distrustful of Hollywood and of people in general. He had seen how quickly loyalty could disappear when fame or profit was at stake. Over the years, that trauma turned into an obsession with control and perfection. He wanted things done right, not just because he was demanding, but because deep down, he feared losing everything again. This fear followed him into his later career and personal life. Though he appeared charming and cheerful on screen, those close to him described him as a man who could be distant and moody, someone who struggled to show vulnerability. His marriages were turbulent, and even with his children, there were periods of emotional distance. He found refuge in painting and writing later in life, but the shadows of his early pain never truly faded. Nancy Culp, meanwhile, carried a different kind of burden, one of quiet loneliness and misunderstood identity. In an era when Hollywood demanded conformity, Nancy was a woman who refused to fit the mold. She was highly educated, witty, and proud of her intellect, qualities that sometimes made her stand out in a world that preferred its actresses to be glamorous rather than brilliant. Yet, her biggest challenge came from the whispers that followed her everywhere. Rumors about her personal life, her relationships, and especially her sexuality. At a time when being open about such matters could destroy a career, Nancy was forced to live with silence. She never denied who she was, but she also never confirmed it publicly. Friends described her as warm and loyal, but also deeply private, someone who carried an invisible wall around her heart. She poured herself into her work, perhaps as a way to escape the loneliness that came with that secrecy. When Buddy publicly opposed her political campaign, that pain resurfaced with full force. It wasn't just a professional betrayal. It was personal, emotional, and deeply wounding for someone who had already endured years of quiet judgment. Despite it all, she handled it with grace, choosing dignity over anger. As time went on, both stars found themselves looking back on their lives with a mixture of pride and regret. Buddy had achieved success and longevity, but was haunted by relationships that ended badly. Nancy had earned respect and admiration, but longed for the understanding and acceptance she rarely received. Behind the fame, they were simply two human beings trying to find peace in a world that demanded perfection. And though their stories were very different, they were bound by a shared truth: the silent pain that fame could never heal. 5. The silence that lasted a lifetime. After the political fallout that shattered whatever bond was left between Buddy Ebsen and Nancy Culp, an invisible curtain fell between them, a silence so deep that it would last for the rest of their lives. It wasn't just a temporary disagreement or a quarrel that time could heal. It became a permanent wall built from pride, hurt, and the kind of disappointment that words can never fully mend. Both had moved on with their lives, at least on the surface, but that unspoken rift remained. Nancy, known for her wit and gentle humor, never spoke harshly of Buddy in public, but she also never forgave him. In interviews, whenever his name came up, she would offer polite, short answers, the kind of carefully chosen words that said more in what they didn't reveal than in what they did. Once, when asked if she would ever reconcile with her former co-star, she smiled faintly and said, "I wish him well, but I never wish to see him again." Those words reflected a quiet sadness, the acceptance that some wounds are simply too deep to heal. As the years passed, Nancy focused on smaller acting projects, public speaking, and local community work. But privately, she was battling a far greater challenge, a fight against cancer. Even as her health declined, she remained strong and composed, facing life's end with the same quiet dignity that had defined her entire career. When she passed away in 1991, many of her fans were heartbroken to learn that she and Buddy had never made peace. There were no phone calls, no letters, no final meeting, just years of silence that stretched endlessly between them. For Buddy Ebsen, the years after Nancy's death brought reflection. He lived a long life, reaching 95, but those close to him said that he often spoke about the past, the shows, the fame, the people he had worked with. And though he rarely mentioned Nancy by name, he once told an interviewer, "We had our differences. I'm sorry things ended the way they did." It was a quiet confession, too late to bridge the distance that had grown between them. But it showed that even the strongest pride can soften with time. Their story remains one of Hollywood's most poignant reminders that behind the laughter and glamour, real people carry real emotions. And sometimes, silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. Theirs was a silence filled with regret, misunderstanding, and perhaps a little bit of longing for what might have been if forgiveness had come sooner. And now, as we look back on their story, it's a powerful lesson about the cost of pride and the fragility of friendship. Before you go, if you enjoyed uncovering this hidden side of Hollywood history, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. Hitting that subscribe button isn't just about growing numbers. It's how you tell YouTube that you value true stories, emotional journeys, and content that goes beyond the surface. Every like and subscription helps this kind of storytelling reach more people who love history, mystery, and human emotion just like you. So go ahead, click subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and let's keep bringing the truth behind Hollywood's brightest smiles to light together.